basketball history. Why don't we start with your name, where you're based, and how old you are?
Peter Patterson. I'm currently based out of Melbourne, Australia, and I'm 78 years old.
Thanks, Peter. Whilst many of our interviews start with the journey of various players, we want to fast forward you past your early sporting experience and take you to 1987. Can you please give us a feel for what was going on in 1987 in Australia with respect to basketball, and perhaps then you can start to walk us towards the first ever Masters basketball tournament, which was held in Launceston in that year.
I think basketball was going through a resurgence at that period. We saw a number of organizations building extra arenas and basketball courts, and we saw a growth of different categories of basketball. Obviously the youth, but also we were seeing the growth of the over 30s, over 40s leagues at that time. And so there was significant interest in the game.
And Albert Park as a stadium existed at that time?
Yeah, Albert Park was sort of the pumping heart of basketball at that time. It had been the center, the focus where national teams had played, where the Melbourne Tigers played, and it was the sort of the focus, say Lindsay Gay's focus, okay, at that time, and so there was a number of evening competitions and lunchtime competitions. I played in a number of them.
An active participant in the sport, in the over 35s aspect of the sport?
Actually, at that time it was open league, okay, so it wasn't over 35s. There was a Thursday night league, a Saturday night or a Sunday night league, and there was lunchtime leagues. And so I played in those, and plus we're currently out near Bulleen at the moment, and Bulleen had a growing over 30s league, and I played there one night a week in the over 30s league.
Presumably, Peter, you and some of the other people playing in the over 35s league in Bulleen started talking about getting together for a tournament.
Actually, there was one individual who I unfortunately forget his name now, and he approached me at Bulleen and said he'd been appointed the coordinator or representative of the Tasmanian Australian Masters, and asked me if I would put a team together to compete in that competition. And I thought that sounded like fun, so we decided we'd have a go.
And so amongst your various skills is this skill of organising things. What were you doing for work around about that time?
At that time I was working with a strategic advisory, strategic management company, and so I guess part of my role in life was organizing and creating projects, businesses, that sort of thing.
The process of putting teams together for this Tasmanian tournament?
Well, actually not, because I didn't have the background in Australia. I'd only lived here 3 or 4 years. I didn't know a lot of the basketball community. When I first came here, I played rugby because I wanted to have fellowship with athletes and stuff like that. And so I moved back to basketball, which has always been one of my first loves. But I didn't know the players. I didn't know the history of the players. And that's a fortunate thing, because a lot of them have become my very close friends over the last number of years. When we first decided to go to Tasmania, we had to lean heavily on a lovely little man. His name was Peter Halligan. And Peter Halligan was the manager of a lunchtime team that was established by the post office, so I didn't work for the post office. And he was the organizer of the team, but he also was I don't know what the word would be, but he was a real fan of basketball, and he knew the names and many of the players that were sort of legends in Australian basketball at the time, ex-pros, NBL, ex-national team members. And so I approached him, and he agreed with a lot of enthusiasm to arrange a team or 2 teams to enter into Tasmania. And he did a terrific job.
So it was this early conversation you had, followed by Peter's hit list, which had you all bound for Launceston, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And so who were some of the players around that first tournament?
Okay, there was kind of a wide range, okay? And I guess the oldest guy, and one of the old legends of Australian basketball, was a guy called Howard Parkinson. His son actually played for St. Kilda in the NBL afterwards, and he was one of the leading scorers in the league. But Howard was the Dion, if you will, of Australian basketball, and he was still able to get up and down the court, and so he was there as sort of a spiritual leader in a sense. And then there was a number of standout players in my mind. There was one guy called Tully Colton, and Tully, tall, he was tall and just a terrific man, and he played a lot of myths and legends basketball and whatnot, but he'd been national team member and had a very long and distinguished career. There was a guy called Mike Slusher. Mike was an ex-pro, tall, very individual, ex-American or American expat, and just a dedicated basketballer, and has had though he worked as a professor at the university, he'd been an NBL coach, he'd played NBL professionally, he was a exceedingly fit individual and played very well. There was a long list of players that are well known to the Australian basketball community, and I'm just trying to think who I should highlight at this juncture.
One of the names that I hear people talking about when we look back at that time was Brian Curl.
Well, actually, Brian didn't play in that first tournament. Brian came afterwards, and Brian was a terrific basketball player, and he was a national team member, and obviously a very accomplished coach. But Brian wasn't at that first competition. He came on after that, and he featured highly in the tournaments in I think he was in Alice Springs, but he was in the Brisbane competition in the Australian Masters there, and.
Two of our regular players today were at that first inaugural Masters tournament, and they are Rolly Holcomb and Frank Jones.
Rolly is a champion. Okay, Rolly. I remember Rolly was also playing at Boleyn at the time, and I was playing in a tournament, and I watched Rolly come into the tournament with a few of his friends as they walked in, and we sort of fancied ourselves as being the guys that were going to win the tournament. And I saw Rolly come in with his friends, and I just shuddered. I mean, Rolly was awesome. But awesome, great as a basketball player, but awesome as a person. And so I'm really pleased to include Rolly as one of my close friends.
Was David Lindstrom?
No, David came in to the process after we became Myths and Legends. And David was a terrific basketball player, probably at the time one of the best imported Australian point guards. David played with us when we played the pregame, and that was one of the early Myths and Legends games. We played the pregame to the NBL All-Star game, and it was the Legends against the coaches. And David could anchor a team. He was a ball player.
So Peter, what were your recollections of that first tournament? How was it organised? What were some of the highlights?
Well, funny recollections. I came over the first night, and I'd come a day later than the rest of the players, and Tully Colton picked me up at the airport, and we went to the casino. And I remember watching Jackie Love dance and sing, and I immediately was enticed. But then we got down to the basketball, and that was really good. I mean, there was guys that all of a sudden step back 10, 15 years in age, and they started playing, but there was an exceedingly competitive edge, okay? One of the things you look at is when you get to senior basketball, and it's a great thing, and it creates a lot of outlets for people, okay? But a lot of people come back to it after having been away from basketball or have never played much basketball. But then you get those few, the ex-elite, who come back and they've never left it mentally, and they're strong, and they go out there and they don't want to lose, and they play tough basketball, and they have a basketball IQ. And so immediately people that played at an elite level communicate, and you know that if someone drives a lane, you drive a lane. If someone cuts, you look up at them. I remember I lapsed once, and we were in one of the games, and David Lindstrom was playing point guard, and I was off guard, and I cut through the key, and I wasn't looking. He just fired the ball in the back of my head, and he says, "Peter, look at the ball," you know. But there was no mucking around when you were playing basketball. When we weren't playing basketball, the fellowship in that group of players was absolutely fantastic. The other thing I remember as a bit of an aside was that when I got over there, I'd had my secretary organize all of the rooms and motels, and they were kind of tight because there were a lot of people coming into Davenport, I think it was. And I was good at a room with 5 people. There was a 1-bedroom, and then there was a whole bunch of beds out in another room. And Howard Parkinson, being the grandfather or the father of basketball players, took the room, and I was sitting in a room with a bed with 3 other guys. Now, I mean, when I was in college playing, I refused to share a room with anybody, you know? And now here I was down the road, but you know what? It was fun. The fellowship was absolutely terrific. And the guys whom I only had known them for a couple of training sessions were warm, welcoming, and they were just a wonderful group of people.
And so Peter Hallett, one of the driving forces that you mentioned in putting these 2 teams together, how did the 2 teams perform? How was your own personal performance at that tournament?
Well, I was fantastic.
Predictably.
In my own mind. Look, Peter put together 2 very good teams, okay? And the teams performed, and they won gold medals in 2 age groups. I think in the over 35s and the over 40s, okay? And the performances were dominant, okay? There was no ifs, ands, or buts, but they should be, because we really had cornered the market on the ex-pros and ex-national team members that were still active and could still walk, okay? And they played, and they played a really good brand of basketball. It was fast, it was efficient, well, fast considering the age, and so it set a pattern, a note, and we went for a massive number of tournaments in multiple age groups, always winning gold. The first one we didn't win 2 gold was in Brisbane when the over 40s won the silver. It was beaten by a Canadian team that had come over, and actually peppered with guys I'd played basketball against in college. But at that era, I played in both the younger and the older teams, just because I could. You know, it was fun.
Peter, you returned to Melbourne after the tournament, and at some point in time, we move on to the origin story of myths and legends. And I might just say that there'll be a few different versions of that story, because it was a long time ago, and there's various people that played a role and various people in the basketball scene at that particular time. But what are your recollections around how myths and legends was established, how the name was designed or formed, and who some of the players or some of the participants were in that discussion?
Look, whenever anything achieves a level of success, okay, there tend to be a group of people who believe they were the progenitors or the fathers of creation, okay? And you know what? Probably they all were, okay? It's probably what happens, okay? And And at that era, after that, a lot of us used to get together for lunch. Okay, I had the unfortunate title of being called Sir Lunch-a-Lot, and that was the era of business lunch and whatnot. And we used to talk, and I'm quite sure that I started to become a legend in my own lunchtime as we talked on. But we talked about the potential of making this and taking it to the next stage. Okay, and that's when the discussion of the name came up. And at that first sort of discussion as we were workshopping it, I viewed all of these guys as legends. And I thought, well, I'm a myth. So it should have been myth and legends, not myths as it is now. So we were going to use the myth and the legends. Subsequently afterwards, I realized we'd been infiltrated by a few more myths. So we became the myths and the legends. So as far as the name goes, it went there. Then we gave that name to a fairly talented guy that had been playing with us called Peter Mellett. And Peter Mellett had a business called AdWorks. And Peter was a talented graphic artist and a PR guy, okay? And he actually designed our first uniforms. He did another interesting thing. There was a show on television in Australia at that time. I'm forgetting the compare's name, but it was a copy of one of the American shows, Tonight Live or something like that. And we wanted to get on that show to try and get sponsors.
It wasn't the Don Lane show?
No, it wasn't. I thought it was Don Lane when we were talking earlier, but it's not. It was an Australian, Melbourne-based actor, okay? It was just a straight knockoff of the US show, but we wanted to get on his show, so Peter Mellett created a storyboard that you would use for a television sequence, and it was absolutely terrific. And he spent a lot of time and work on it. I still have the storyboard, but he put a lot of effort and time into the program at that time, and he played in a lot of the tournaments. When I was there, and then after I left, I understand he continued to play.
Peter, who else was around either that lunch table or alternatively who was participating in that discussion? There was yourself, there was Peter Mellett. Who else was in the backdrop?
I think quite possibly a player called Ken Burbridge. He was one of the coaches in Tasmania, an ex-NBL player of, I understand, some note. Now you understand I didn't live in Australia when all of these guys played in the NBL, and I understand that he had 1 year or more was the scoring championship, and was a good ball player and a very aggressive individual, and so we used to spend some time talking about basketball. And he actually, when we went to the tournament in the Philippines, he actually was the team captain, coach, and organized most of the players for that team.
In setting up Myths and Legends, was there any money that needed to change hands? Did an organisation or an entity get created? Was there some money that went into uniforms or any other, supporting investment to ensure the club's success?
We were constantly looking for sponsors, but since we were old stagers, we didn't have any. So it fell on me to provide the ways and means to finance the early trips, the uniforms which we got in the Philippines, and interesting in the Philippines trip. I sat down with a couple of the participants, and we did a budget, and so I sorted the funds for it, and I didn't like handling money, so I had my secretary organize the hotels and the flights and that sort of stuff, and then I gave the lump of the cash that was left to Peter Mellett to be the treasurer. Now, Peter had his own business, and so he was a solid sort of individual, but I find out afterwards that they blew the budget in the Philippines, and Peter dug into his own pocket. So I think that if you're going to say there was a financial sponsor to some extent, Peter Mellett joins that list. But basically up through, we managed to provide pretty much complete sponsorship for some of the early tournaments, which was Tasmania, the Philippines, a couple of those. And then after that, it sort of died off because I felt at that point that I couldn't become an enduring sponsor. And however, some of the players, because of their past professional status and whatnot, wouldn't attend the tournaments unless they were not out of pocket. And so we continued to selectively sponsor some of the players. But after that, after Brisbane, that sort of died away.
And so we've spoken about the inception of the name, the design of the logo, the initial investment. Was there a natural leader of the organisation, or who was the first leader of the organisation, given that your role and Peter's role was sponsor and organiser and designer?
Well, Peter actually sort of drifted away from the organisation after Tasmania. Okay, then there was sort of a lull, and then Hingston came and became involved in it.
This is
Eric Hingston, yeah. Now, Eric's passed away, but he was just an absolute gem of a person. I became a very good friend, but he was also organized lots of basketball stuff. Okay, he did a number of leagues, and he also was intricately involved in the management of the Australian Masters in Melbourne, and he provided that sort of, I wouldn't say leadership. He provided that underpinning, that the technical requirement to follow up. Okay, he was a good administrator, and he did that. We went along rather aimlessly, I've got to tell you, look, we weren't a business. We didn't want to be a business. We wanted to have fun and play basketball. Okay, and so whenever there was a void, okay, just based on my personality, I probably jumped in and tried to fill it, but I wasn't the right person to do it. And from what I understand is that after the Australian Masters in Melbourne, okay, in which we had two teams in the finals.
What year are we talking about?
Oh, I can't remember, to tell you the truth. Actually, I sent it on a list that I showed you. At that tournament, we had two teams in there in the, I don't know, over 40s or whatever it is, age group.
I think it's 95.
95, yeah, okay. And there was two guys that sort of took the, if you will, the team captain roles, okay? On the team that I played, it was David Lindstrom. And on the team that, on the other team, it was Eric, or Ian Farr. And I hadn't known Ian very well at that time, but I was quite impressed with him, and he just seemed like a very stable, solid sort of guy and a good player, okay? And apparently in businesses and in organizations and whatnot, there used to be a theory of a tipping point. There's a tipping point if something happens and things started to would go to the next level. And I think the tipping point was when Ian Farr, who I understand had an accounting background, took over the mantle of leadership of the organization. And from what I understand and what I believe is that had he have not done that, the organization would have probably ended up sort of wallowing away and being a nice sort of thing with a few guys on an ad hoc basis would play in a tournament. He drove it, organized it, and made it into the organization that it is today. So if there is a key individual in this whole thing, it's Ian Farr.
Yeah, well said, and there's many of our members that would agree. It's interesting, I came into the organisation only a few years ago, relatively speaking, and that initial purpose around having fun and playing basketball is still vibrant within the ethic and the values of the organisation. Ian's ambition was to keep people playing for as long as possible, and that's the credo of the organisation and still is to this day. You're catching up with Ian a bit later on today. for lunch, as well as a few of our other members and people that we've mentioned in today's interview. What was it about Ian's style or his passion or his values that you think enabled him to really leave a fingerprint on the organisation?
Look, I probably didn't know Ian as well as I would have liked to, okay? But I know him by reputation. I know him by the company he keeps. I know him by the opinions that others hold of him, okay? And he's just a solid individual. Obviously he has organizational skills, and he has a dedication. And you know what? He's the kind of person people like, okay? And so I think he put that mix together that just made it happen.
Peter, I might ask you about some of the other names of players and personalities that were around during this era. And the reason I ask these questions is because it's rarer and rarer to be able to sort of get in contact with these people, and of course some of them are no longer with us. Mal Speed is someone's name that comes up from time to time.
Yeah, Mel wasn't a die-in-the-wool myths and legends guy. Mel, I played against him in Bulleen. He was in one of the over 35s league. And Mel, you know, became the Australian, then international president or chairman of the cricket, the Cricket Australia, and then the international cricket, okay? Mel did, however, play with the Myths and Legends when they went to the World Masters Games in Denmark, okay? And a good fellow, interesting guy.
Robbie Johnson.
Robbie was an absolute character. Robbie played initially in the NBL at St Kilda along with Ken Burbridge, and they were known as something twins. They were both tenacious guards, okay? Good ball player, very tenacious sort of guy. Interesting character though too, because his father, who had been very much involved in sponsoring basketball and was the team manager when they went to Denmark, was Bruce Johnson, known as Bruce the Bookie or the New Yorker. And he has a book printed out and that was edited by Lindsay Gaze, and he's one of the characters in a number of spheres of Australia, okay? But just bigger than life character that you met. And Robbie was just a good, solid basketball player.
And there's another Robbie that I think is also ex-St Kilda, and that's Robbie Cadee.
Yeah, Robbie Cadee, I first ran into Robbie Cadee when we were playing, I think, in Alice Springs, and he was playing for a team from New South Wales at the time. And I remember Robbie was terrific. His son plays in the NBL right now. And Robbie was cutting through the key, and I came from a fairly aggressive, no back off sort of basketball background, and Robbie cuts through the key and his head was down, and the next thing Robbie knew, he was lying on the ground. And Lindstrom walked up, who was a good friend of Robbie's, looked down at him and said, "Welcome to Masters basketball." And he took it in good spirits. Robbie then played with us in a couple of tournaments, but he kept pushing his own sort of group up together in New South Wales. But he was good value, good basketball player, nice guy.
Another father-son pair-up in basketball history is Rick Longley.
Yes, actually, Rick, as a matter of fact, I saw his son on television last night, Luke. Rick came over to play in the game, or the pregame to the NBL All-Star game. I hadn't known Rick before that because he was an architect out in Perth. He was a very good friend of Peter Byrne, who was a good friend of mine and a champion basketball player. Peter had 2 Olympics, I think, under his belt and 3 or 4 national teams and NBL, and had a pro career in Germany. But we picked up Luke at at the airport, and I remember we wanted to go have a coffee, and there's nothing open because it was like the red eye. So we went to the Vic Market, and Rick said to me, he says, the last time I was here, I remember walking through here with Luke on my shoulders, and I thought, my God, 7'2" on top of 6'10", that'd make it 14 feet tall.
Rocky Crosswhite is a name that comes up from that era from time to time.
Rocky, also known as Perry Crosswhite, Rocky, a good man. Rocky, tall guy, notable U.S. college basketball player, played on the national team in Australia, and I think played for Melbourne Tigers for a period of time. He is also notable because he became the general manager or the head of the Olympic Committee, which he was on that committee when they got the Australian Olympic Games. He was also for many years the head of the Commonwealth Games, and great administrator, good basketball player. I always thought of him and Peter Byrne as they're both tall. Okay, Perry a little taller than Peter. I think Peter's about 6'6", and Rocky's a little taller than that. And I thought, well, this. Why do the tall guys always want to stand outside and shoot? But they could both go inside and outside. But they both had a good shot, and they were good players.
David Zhang was another personality.
Yeah, David Zhang was a very good friend of mine. My background crosses over into China quite a bit. I'm actually married to a Chinese girl, terrific. David played was the captain of the China national team during the era that China couldn't play in the international games. I think that at 6'7" in guard skills or 6'8" in guard skills, he could have well been an NBA type of player at the time. He came over here to coach. I actually helped sponsorship him over coaching. It was actually Ken Burbridge who had helped get him involved over here. And he played with us in a number of tournaments. Well, not so funny, the sort of a sad part was that he flew over to the Philippines with us, but he was traveling on a Chinese passport. And when he got to the Philippines immigration, they sent him back to Australia because they wouldn't let a Chinese national into the country. So we didn't have the benefit of him in Australia, but very soft hands, good shot, good basketball IQ. Well, most of the guys I've talked about have good basketball IQs.
We can't really talk about this era without mentioning the name Lindsay Gaze. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your recollections of him and I guess his trajectory within the sport and his contribution to the game that we have today.
Look, I think that's more up to others to talk about Lindsay. I know Peter Byrne played with him or for him and with him, okay? And they're good friends. I actually had lunch with Lindsay, Perry Crosswhite, Lindsay and his wife, Perry Crosswhite, his wife, when David Lindstrom just came to town a couple of weeks ago. Tully Colton was there and Peter Byrne was there. And I didn't have a lot to do with Lindsay. He was made the titular head of the Melbourne Masters Games Committee. And so I met with him on a number of occasions. I do, however, believe, and that's for others to say, but he's acknowledged as a bit of the father of Australian basketball, and it was through his perseverance, his drive, his knowledge that he pushed the sport along significantly, and also he was obviously the father of Andrew, which is a very notable thing. We all have, many of the guys that you mentioned there, including myself, had sons that played basketball, professional and otherwise, and people get it wrong. They think that because you have a son playing basketball, he's fulfilling your ambitions. I don't think that's correct in most cases. I think you fulfilled your own ambitions, and I think that's what myths and legends is about. people continuing to fulfill their ambitions and their desires and their love of a sport, okay? I remember my son phoning me when he quit pro basketball in Europe, and he says, "Dad, I hope I don't disappoint you." He says, "But I'm going to quit and go back to university." And I said, "Well, why would it disappoint me?" I said, "You've done what you wanted, okay?" And so that's it. Now I know Brian Curl, his son played. Howard Parkinson, his son played, okay? David Lindstrom, his son played. Perry Crosswright, his son played. Many of those people had sons and daughters. Perry's daughter, Rocky's daughter, also played professional for Boleyn. So a lot of those players had that, but they weren't living their lives for their children, okay? They were living their lives for themselves, and that's what Myths and Legends allows some of these people to do, is to continue to follow their passion and live what has been and continued to be a very important part of their lives.
Peter, it's been 50 years since that lunch, and 50 years since the first tournament, the inception of Myths and Legends. I guess at the time you'd have no idea that those conversations would endure and that the club would grow on as it has. If you look forward to the next 50 years, perhaps you can tell us about some of the hopes and dreams and aspirations that you hold personally for Myths and Legends.
Well, I was looking for some pictures of back at the time of the basketball. I saw a picture of me, and then I look at a picture of me now, and I realize there has been 50 years of lunches. And so I hope the aspirations for the future are 50 years of lunches. I think these things tend to get a life of their own, okay? And I think they can evolve and they can grow. And the initial intent and dreams of the people that were involved in the formation of it never involved it getting as big as it did today, okay? Perhaps Ian Farr had that view when he started to push it, but I think he'd even be surprised now, okay? So where this goes, I don't know. Whether it evolves, okay? I mean, societies grow. Rome got big and then it fell and crunched, okay? Whether that happens to the Myths and Legends, I don't know. But I'm going to tell you, you don't look 50 years ahead. What you look is what you have today, okay? And you look at what you have today and you enjoy it. And that, to me, when I go out to watch a Masters tournament and I see I went and watched Roland Holcomb playing at Boleyn in a Masters tournament, and I got as much joy out of watching them as they got playing, okay? And so that's what it's about. It's not about 50 years from now. It's about today.
Well, in respect of those goals, what's on your personal bucket list? What other mountains do you plan to conquer?
Well, your bucket lists change, okay? When I was going to go to the Adelaide or Alice Springs Masters, I was running at a track in Melbourne trying to get fit, and this old fella waves me over, and he says, "What are you running for?" And I said, "Well, there's a real answer and a flippant answer." He says, "Well, what's the real answer?" No, he says, "What's the flippant answer?" And I said, "The flippant answer is that I'm going to win the over 70s 100-yard dash when I'm 70." And he says, "Pleased to meet you. My name's Roy Gathercole. I hold the world record for over 70s 100-yard dash." He said, he says, "What's the real reason?" I says, I'm just trying to get fit for the Alice Masters." He says, "I'll see you there." But you were talking about ambitions and what you hold for the future. When you get to an older stage of life, okay, and it's hard to believe that you're getting older. When you sit down, you don't feel old. When we're sitting talking about basketball, I'm still out there playing, okay? But when I stand up and start walking, I realize that I'm just not quite there anymore, or I'm a long way away from there, okay? So the hopes and ambitions for the future are that other people get that ability to enjoy and experience what you experienced, okay? You have those quiet moments, and you have those moments where life isn't so good, but you draw back on the past. And I find myself drawing back, and I'll smile. And some of the things I smile about are related to what happened in the basketball career. There's other things too, but those are some of the nice things in life.
That's terrific, Peter. We've been able to have a smile today and a laugh, and I'm sure that once this video is available for our members and for others to see, they'll also have a smile about the origin story, which was Myths and Legends. Thank you for your contribution to the game and for coming out to have a chat with us today. We deeply appreciate it.
Well, my pleasure.